He's back. Pedro is back. One of the smartest men on this side of heaven. Pedro Gonzalez is back. He's associate editor of Chronicles, a magazine of American culture. And I wanted to really talk to him about what's happening concerning home owners and home buyers in America. And a lot of you know that I've been mentioning that you should buy land, buy yourself a house. It is the American way. But now it's difficult because the people with the money are going out and buying up the homes, family homes, and turning them into major apartment buildings. And I want to talk to Pedro about that. Pedro, welcome back. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, sir. Are you a father?
Yes, I am.
Happy belated Father's Day. How was it?
Thank you. It was great. It was my first Father's Day. It was very special, and I actually have my second baby is on the way. So it was great. I think it's one of those things that you really can't experience it and know what it means until you become a father. So.
That's right. It's an amazing thing. Right on, man. Well, we need a lot of babies, so keep making them.
Working on it.
Pedro, what is happening to the American homeowners, and what are the implications for the future of America if we continue to go down this road where the big companies are buying them up?
So if you're a young person and you're looking at buying your first house, you might end up competing with a huge financial institution that can just, I mean, if you're in the business of building these communities, right, these real estate developers, they build these neighborhoods and then they sell the houses. Okay, well, if you're in that business, you can either sell each one of those homes individually to some new couple that's trying to get a house and start building a foundation. And home ownership has long been considered a way to build generational wealth, right? It's a way to pass down something that's valuable, something that never really depreciates to our children and to our grandchildren. Okay, so you can sell to them. They have a lot less money than, say, Blackrock, which is one of the biggest, most corrupt money managers in the world. And if Blackrock makes you a deal twice as much per unit as you would get otherwise, who are you going to sell to? You're probably going to sell to BlackRock. And then organizations like BlackRock will ultimately end up renting out entire communities. And so you're in this really strange position now where the country is heading toward rentership, where entire neighborhoods are now being treated like apartment complexes. And your landlords are these huge financial institutions that don't really care a whole lot about what I think most everyday Americans do. And I recently did a Tucker Carlson hit about this, and that hit was actually reacting to an article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about this, about how increasingly everyday Americans find themselves competing with these huge, basically permanent capital institutions. Like they're just in the money business and they never go away. Even if even if something happens to them, like Goldman Sachs or something like that, like they get bailed out by you. So they're just always going to be around, even if you're not.
Yeah.
Increasingly, we're competing with them for being able to buy houses.
When I was growing up in Alabama on the plantation, we were taught that we should buy land. Growing up, it was just that's all I knew. Not all I knew, but we were taught to buy a piece of America, buy land, buy a home. And so at 25 years old, once I turned 25, the first thing I did was went out and got a realtor, and I bought a home at 25. And in buying that home, it allowed me to do other things. I can refi, I can do all that. And that's becoming more difficult now for young people to do it. And as you said, they don't have anything to leave for their children because they are not able to buy land in most cases. Hardly a day goes by when I don't get some type of notice in mail from these big businesses wanting to buy my home so they can turn it into apartment buildings. In Los Angeles, these big buildings are going up everywhere. As a matter of fact, before the Chinese virus, the owner of this building that we're in for the business was going to tear it down and turn it into a big complex, apartment complex. But the
Yeah.
Chinese virus hit, so they had to put it on hold, I guess. And it's happening all around America. What
Yeah.
can the people do about? Oh, one other thing I want to tell you, Pedro. In Los Angeles, I love homes, the style of the homes, right? So
Mhm.
you can see communities where they really an attractive community. But now that they are tearing them down and building these complexes, they're changing the image of the
Yeah.
family, the one family home, the community. It doesn't even look the same anymore.
Right. Yeah. You get what I think one term is Mcmansions. Basically, all these buildings that maybe they do look nice in their own way, but they all look the same.
Yeah,
So entire communities with these, like I live in Ohio and like in other places in the Midwest, a lot of these houses are very old, but they
yeah,
also have these individual touches to them, uh,
yes,
like unique uh, work on the outside of the houses with the way that windows are cut or with these kind of ornamental wood carvings under the roof. It's really interesting. Like you can drive around my neighborhood and you'll see all these different houses that have these unique individual touches. Basically, you can tell that someone built them with their hands and they built them with the idea of building a beautiful space for people to live in and to raise a family in.
right.
These McMansions, they all look the same. They all have basically the same features, and you have a little bit of individuality, but ultimately, when you get in an airplane and you fly overhead, they all look the same, right?
Yes,
Um, so I think there's something to that. There's something I think kind of soul crushing about that. And there, I mean, there are people that like living in those places. And I guess there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't know if I want to see the entire country become basically a big homogenous development that looks exactly the same, right?
yeah,
Um, so I think one thing that could be done is making it so that there is a punitive, I mean, like heavy tax on buying real estate in bulk. Basically, make it disincentivize it by just making it not make sense for these people. Like you'll end up losing more in taxes if you do this, and then taxing real estate that is held by hedge funds. These financial institutions that are treating homes like basically are financializing homes. They're treating them as a kind of as a speculative thing, right?
yeah,
Punish them by taxing it. It's like you, if you want to buy houses, then we're gonna take it out of your skin and make it really difficult for you to profit from this. I think those are just two of the things that we could do. There's a lot more that needs to be done, and I think it's important also to strain this kind of cultural element to it. If you're living in a space that's not yours, that's rented or leased or whatever, things like gun ownership or like even owning animals, like all that stuff goes up in the air, right? In some states, your landlord can write gun ownership out of the lease. What does that do for this for like things like the Second Amendment, right?
yeah,
I think there are a lot of questions here. It's like ripples in a pond. Uh, and of course the stone that we're throwing in the pond is these huge hedge funds that are underwriting pensions and padding bottom lines by buying up homes, and then the social and cultural implications of turning the United States into a nation of renters, where we basically don't have any power over what we own and where we and
yeah,
what conditions we can stay in our house. And I think it was funny to watch the narrative go from the Wall Street Journal published that story, and then a bunch of other media outlets basically said that the Wall Street Journal was being hysterical. It's not true. They're not doing this. They're not buying up houses. They're actually the good guys. You're the bad guy because you refuse to allow these old homes to be turned into apartment complexes. So you're actually part of the problem. And then a few days later, there were these stories in Bloomberg and other places that were saying actually America should become a nation of renters.
amazing. You know, it's hard to tax these people and take strong action because our government is supporting the takeover of communities and build these projects. I used to attend some of those meetings, and what they are doing, they are building these big apartment complexes over the idea of bringing in low income people, right? And
Yeah.
so the bottom floors of the apartment building, the first and second floor is for low income people, they say. and then the top floors are for people with money. And so the government are helping to fund these buildings. How do we fight against a government that is not for the people and supporting what these big businesses are doing?
Well, that's the question, right? I think this is a long fight. I don't think this is something that's going to be resolved in 4 or 8 years. I think this is a long game, and I think that the people that are behind this also know that it's a long game. At
Yeah,
the same time, they're telling you to not worry about it, to look the other way. They're also investing billions of dollars in the prospect of turning America into a nation of renters. In other words, they're betting on this being the future. So they're thinking ahead, and I think that's what we need to do too. We need to stop focusing on, I guess, things that are not so important that are immediately in front of us and that are outrageous and they get our attention. And we should instead be focusing on this kind of long game that these institutions are playing, and that, like you said, our leaders are either part of, or they hope that we don't notice, or they don't care because they don't care that they're going to leave behind a worse country than the one that they inherited for their children and grandchildren. It's our responsibility to care and to do what we can to hold our elected officials accountable and to demand that they actually take action against these institutions. I think often politics on both sides become kind of a game of like who can get the angriest about the news today,
yeah,
and just kind of become like an outrage thing, and it makes it really easy to lose sight of this bigger picture and this much longer and more serious game that these people are playing.
I
Basically,
agree.
that we don't notice that the future is slipping away from us.
Another thing that's very interesting to me is that housing prices have gone up. So these businesses come in and they are offering you a lot of money. And so if you sell to them, you're not able to really go and buy another home because everything is so
Yep.
expensive. So it looked
Yep.
like you're making money, but you're really not because you can't
Yep.
purchase another home.
Yep. There was a story recently about that in the Wall Street Journal where a family sold a home and wanted to go buy a new home, but exactly that happened. They couldn't. Basically, the money that they got from their house could not buy a new house, and they had to actually settle for like a fixer-upper,
Yeah.
which nothing wrong with that. But the ideally, when you buy a house and you sell it, you are doing that to upgrade, to buy a bigger home because now
Right.
kids or something. You're not supposed to downgrade into like a worse home or something like that you have to put money into to fix. And that's another consequence of the financialization of the housing market, is that when these huge institutions like BlackRock and JP Morgan Asset Management are buying up homes, they're also artificially inflating the price of housing, which again, that's fine with them because they can absorb the cost of it, but I can't. Well,
Yeah.
I can't compensate for the inflation of the home price bubble, right? And I mean, eventually, it's kind of a repeat of what we saw with the previous housing crisis. In many ways, there are a lot of parallels here. And if, like some people are warning, this home price bubble does eventually burst because of the prices that are rising as a result of these financial institutions buying up houses, it's going to be us, the people that get priced out of housing,
Yeah.
the ones that get kicked out of our homes or that get kicked out of home ownership. We're also the same people that get to subsidize any kind of future bailout that's going to happen.
Amazing. Um, can you explain to me? I'm black and slow, right? I need to understand this equity firm like BlackRock. First of all, what does it mean, equity firm, and what is a BlackRock? For those who don't know.
Basically, BlackRock is just a huge money managing organization that dabbles in different kinds of assets and investments. Uh, it's interesting because they're so corrupt, but they are still they're fine. They're still able to operate as if nothing, as if they're not doing anything bad. In Germany, BlackRock recently had its offices raided because it was basically exploiting some kind of a loophole in the European legal system for profit. It's really nebulous, like all these different things they have their hands into. They've also got ties to the Chinese government. They helped set up, I think it was an investment fund with China pretty recently in the last, I want to say 4 years or so. they've also got a lot of hands in what the Mexican government is doing. Uh, this is an organization that is bad news, and they don't really care about little people. And I think part of the reason that they're able to get away with a lot of stuff is, on the one hand, like you pointed out, they basically own our political leaders and government institutions. But I think they're also just huge. And for the everyday person, myself included, just it's difficult to fathom and understand all the different things that BlackRock has its fingers in, and to unwind it. And I think that's actually part of it. And I actually am not a finance guy, and but when I saw this story, I was like, okay, I need to kind of familiarize myself with the basics of this because there's clearly something very wrong going on.
Yeah.
I think that is something that BlackRock relies on, or institutions like BlackRock rely on, is the fact that we don't really understand what they're doing. And therefore, we kind of defer to them. Like, okay, well, BlackRock has this much money. If the federal government, if the Fed is going to have BlackRock buy up bonds and basically function as the Federal Reserve, then they obviously must know what they're doing. And it's not really our business to question them and understand really what's going on. I think that's part of it. And I mean, if you look at media narratives, that's basically what you're being told by Vox, by the Atlantic. It's like, well, like they're actually the good guys. Take it from us. Like it's complicated, but they are the good guys in the end.
And so this firm is worldwide, is that right?
Yeah, they're based in the United States, but they have dealings, like I said, in China, Mexico.
Amazing. And
Yeah.
so is it true that they pour money into our government so they can change the laws to fit what they want instead of what we, the people, want?
Yeah, in that sense, they're not dissimilar from any other organization in the sense they lobby the government, but the other things that they do, like working closely with the federal government, buying up bonds and things like
Yeah.
that, and basically, if you talk to a libertarian about this, they'll tell you that, well, the problem is not institutions like BlackRock, it's the government, and if you can get the government out of it, then basically BlackRock will have no political clout to do these kinds of things. But I think what these criticisms miss is that for an institution at the scale of BlackRock, they basically function like the federal government. In their own way, they're kind of helping define monetary policy. There's not a whole lot of separation between what the interests of the federal government and the interests of BlackRock. And they'll go back and forth, and maybe BlackRock will get fined or something like that. But it's like the cost of doing business for them. So yeah, I think this is a different kind of animal in what they use their capital to do, and they also use their voting power to steer, or they use their institutional power to steer investments away from like organizations that are involved in manufacturing or are pro Second Amendment. We'll say that. There's an article, I think, in CNBC that talks about how in the last few years, BlackRock has decided that if the federal government isn't going to do something about gun control, well, they're going to do it. And they're going to use what institutional power they have to steer their investors in that direction, away basically from the foundations of the Second Amendment. And it's really kind of disturbing because at that point, it's like, do you even need legislation to basically change, to structurally change things like gun ownership in the United States? BlackRock seems to think not.
Amazing. Recently, BlackRock committed to something called racial audits of their company. And I want to know, what is that exactly? And do you see this as a common trend in the companies that are buying up these homes?
I haven't read that story, but are they talking about like auditing uh, for racial quotas for employment, or what does that mean?
It's about diversity and inclusion, and
Mhm.
they're using that as
Yeah.
a lot of folks are using that right now as a means to get away with doing wrong.
Right.
And I'm wondering, are we going to see more of that in these big companies? it's kind of like a cover up, really, to rip off the
Yeah, well,
people.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, that's my sense of any time a corporation does something like this, anything like affirmative action or like any race-based corporate policy, it's either I think it's a mixture of cynicism, which means they don't really believe in it, like you said, it's a cover, but also ideology, and in the sense that there are probably some people that really do believe in that stuff. And so I always just assume it's a mixture of both. But I think that even if they do sincerely believe in that stuff, it still conveniently for them works as a cover for things. And
Yeah.
a good example is Citibank. So Citibank published this study in September that concluded that the United States has taken it was like some huge number, like 16 or 30 trillion dollar hit to its GDP as a result of racism. Basically, racism has cost the United States trillions. They define it as like lost opportunities, that racism has cost us these opportunities for employment or for whatever, and in the sum total it's in the trillions how much money discrimination has cost us. And Blackrock got or not Blackrock, Citigroup, which is another huge corrupt institution, right? They got tons of good press, like NPR, I think interviewed one of the board members, and they were praised as being like the wokest bank on Wall Street. And everyone forgot that a month later, in October, Citigroup was fined a few $1 million. I think the figure was in the hundreds of millions. I want to say between $200 and $300 million for. It was actually interesting because federal regulators didn't actually specify what they were being fined for. They were very vague, basically saying like, as a result of Citigroup's negligence in handling people's information, and then used a really bunch of vague terms to say like they did a bad stuff that we don't really want to get into, and so we're going to fine them like $200 million. And that happened after they published this study on how racism has cost the United States trillions of dollars. And if you go back further, Citigroup was also forced to pay restitution to about 2 million credit card customers who were paying higher interest rates than they should have been.
Yeah.
You're have like an annual review, and then you have, you know, if you're making payments and all that, then your interest rate is reduced, right? Well, Citigroup wasn't doing that, and so for about 2 million customers, they had to pay out like something like over $300 million in restitution to those customers who they were basically ripping off, like illegally ripping off and knowingly ripping off. But again, fine, because they talk about racism now, and they appointed a female CEO. So all of the really horrible stuff that institution is involved in is all forgiven and forgotten.
Amazing. How, in the few minutes that we have left here, how deep are their ties to the Democratic Party? This Black Rock group and others, how deeply are they with the Democratic Party?
I think they're tied to both political parties. I think, see, it's really ironic because when we think of the Democratic Party, or I should say, when we think of Occupy Wall Street and that movement, we associate it with the Democratic Party, right?
Right.
The people that were throwing their bodies in front of the doors of banks in cities just a few years ago. Well, now that same party is the party that has, or at least in 2020, had more billionaire backers and basically more of the nation's most powerful and wealthy institutions supporting Joe Biden. And it's not an exaggeration to say that the Democratic Party has, in the last few years, become the party of the wealthy, and specifically the ultra wealthy. The Republican Party has this problem too. They're trying to portray themselves as like the new working class party. They still have these. They're politicians.
Yeah.
They're going to have the same problems as politicians who happen to be Democrats. Whether or not one party is worse than the other in this regard, I can't really say. I think that, like I said, at the end of the day, this is not a Republican or Democrat problem. It's a political problem.
Yeah, I believe, Pedro, at this point, we in America have a one-party system now. When I became, one time I was a Democrat, but when my heart changed, I became a Republican because I liked the platform of the Republican Party: God, country, family, freedom, Constitution, right? But now we only have one party. I don't see much difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. And so I just don't know what, there's a whole, as you said, there are bigger issues going on that we the people are not aware of, and there's just so much to deal with. It looked like we may have lost our country, that it's becoming South Africa, and I don't see how we're going to turn it around. Do you?
Well, I think it's easy to feel that way, and I feel that way on some days too. But you have kids, so you know. But I can't accept that it's hopeless because
Yeah.
I have kids, and so I think about like the kind of future that they're going to have and the world that I'm going to leave them. So I have to hope, and I mean that's the reason I'm doing this, right? Is I'm hoping that that more and more people will notice these things.
Yeah. Yeah,
That
I
may-
have hope too, but it just,
it's a tall order.
yeah, so much going on. How can people get your website? How can they read what you're doing? Keep up with what you're doing.
So I write primarily at chroniclesmagazine.org. All my writings outside of that, and whenever I do op-eds in other places or interviews like this, I publish them through my newsletter at contra.substack.org.
Right
Or
on.
sorry, contra.substack.com.
Amazing. Pedro Gonzalez, thank you so much, man. Very smart guy. And I'm not giving up. I do have hope, but it's a mess, man. It's a real
Yeah,
mess.
I agree. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, buddy. Thanks for coming on. Amazing. And don't forget to like, follow, tweet, subscribe, and share the Jesse Lee Peterson radio show, folks. We really appreciate it. We are at war. It is a spiritual battle for the soul of America. And it's going to take all of us to do it.